chalk screeched against the blackboard at precisely 3:17 a.m., though the building had been locked for 6 hours. Security footage from that night showed an empty 5th grade classroom, yet the surveillance audio captured what sounded like 27 voices reciting the multiplication tables in perfect unison. When I arrived the next morning for my first day as a substitute teacher at Elmwood Elementary, those numbers were still on the board. 3x9 mirror 27. I had 37 substitution days behind me that semester, each one blending into the next forgettable routine of attendance sheets and cafeteria duties. But Elmwood felt different from the moment I stepped through its Gothic revival entrance. The building had been constructed in 1923, its architecture a testament to an era when schools were built to last centuries. The original hardwood floors creaked beneath my sensible shoes as I navigated the Warren-like hallways to room 217. Mrs. Kowalski had left detailed lesson plans and seating charts. But what caught my attention was the handwritten note tucked beneath them. Don't let them change the seating arrangement. The desks must remain exactly as shown. If you hear them asking to move, pretend you didn't hear. This is important. The seating chart was dated 1983, yellowed with age, but marked with fresh blue ink corrections that made no sense. Students listed as present, with death dates beside their names. My unease deepened when I noticed several desks were bolted to the floor. An odd choice for a modern classroom. Each secured desk had a small brass nameplate. Sarah Mitchell, 1962, Tommy Chen, 1973, Jessica Williams, 1984. The other desks, the movable ones where living students would sit, surrounded these fixed points in a careful arrangement that struck me as deliberately ritualistic rather than practical. As I wrote my name on the board, Miss Thompson, the chalk snapped cleanly in half. Both pieces rolled to rest perfectly parallel to each other at the base of the blackboard, exactly 1 inch apart. When I bent to retrieve them, I noticed faint scratches in the wooden floor, words carved hurriedly and deep. Remember the 7th student in the back row? I glanced at that spot and felt my stomach drop. There were only 26 desks in the room, but according to Mrs. Kowalski's updated notes, I was expecting 27 students. The children filtered in at 8:15, and everything seemed normal enough. They were the usual mix of chattering voices and nervous energy that accompanies every substitute teacher's arrival. But as I marked attendance, discrepancies emerged. The class roster listed 27 names, yet only 26 children sat before me. More disturbing, one name on the list was penciled out so thoroughly it had torn through the paper, leaving a perfect rectangular void where a student's identity should have been. "Good morning, class," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm Miss Thompson, and I'll be your teacher this week while Mrs. Kowalski is away." A small hand shot up immediately. "Emma Rodriguez," according to my updated seating chart. "Miss Thompson, you're sitting in Tommy's seat." I blinked, confused. I was standing at the front of the room, not sitting anywhere. "Tommy always sits right where you're standing," she insisted, pointing to an empty space that held only air and morning sunlight. The lesson proceeded without further incident until 9:47 a.m., precisely the time noted in my lesson plan for the first restroom break. As the children lined up, I counted heads automatically. 27. I counted again. More carefully, 27 distinct heads, 27 children standing in line. But when I checked the seating chart to ensure no one was left behind, I counted 26 empty desks, with one whose occupant had simply vanished. By 10:15, during independent reading time, the scratching began. It started faintly, like mice in the walls, but grew more insistent. The sound seemed to come from inside the permanently fixed desks, a rhythmic scraping that matched the cadence of reading aloud. When I pressed my ear against one of the brass-plated desks, I distinctly heard a child's voice, reciting from a Dick and Jane primer, though the voice carried an echoing quality that suggested vast distance rather than nearby presence. During our 11-hour spelling test, the pencils began to move on their own, not dramatically, just slight adjustments as students wrote. A period would shift one space to the left. A D would become a B after being written correctly. The corrections appeared to be made by invisible classmates eager to help their friends cheat. One student, Mallory Johnson, began crying when her paper filled with answers she swore she hadn't written. The handwriting was definitely not hers. It belonged to something older, more formal than modern cursive. Lunch came as a relief, but the cafeteria only deepened my unease. As the children filed out, I discovered myself completely alone in the room, a concerning violation of supervision protocols. Yet I could hear 26 students laughing and chatting just outside the door. When I rushed to follow, the hallway was empty save for wet footprints leading to room 217. Small feet, child-sized, but the prints appeared to come from nowhere, simply materializing on the floor and ending at my classroom door. I spent my lunch break investigating the locked storage closet at the back of the room. Mrs. Kowalski had noted it was off limits, but curiosity overcame caution. Inside, I found stacks of photo albums, each one dedicated to a different class year at Elmwood. The photos progressed normally through decades of smiling children until I reached 1955. That year's album was different. Instead of one class photo, there were 28 individual portraits. Each child posed alone against the same background, but several portraits were defaced with violent black X's across the children's faces. On the inside cover, a list of names in spidery handwriting, those who stayed for extra credit. Below it, another note in fresher ink. Lesson incomplete. Students must finish what they started. I hurried back to my desk as students returned from lunch, my mind racing with questions. But the afternoon felt charged with anticipation that hadn't been present before. Students whispered more frequently, their conversations cutting off whenever I approached. They kept glancing at the windows, though the view showed only the unremarkable teacher's parking lot. At 1:30, exactly when listed in my lesson plan for mathematics, every student simultaneously opened their desk lids and removed identical workbooks that shouldn't have been there. These weren't the modern math texts piled neatly on the supply table. These were aged student workbooks from various decades, many significantly older than the children themselves. Each child began working silently on the same page of word problems, while I stood frozen, unsure how to proceed. The problems were disturbing in their specificity. If 7 students enter a classroom at 8:15 a.m., and 6 leave at 3:15 p.m. How many students remain overnight? And Sarah has been studying in the same desk for 60 years. If she continues at the current rate, when will she graduate? As students hunched over their work, their shadows cast wrong proportions on the floor. Too tall, too thin, some stretching across desks that held no visible children. The scratching from within the fixed desks intensified throughout the math lesson. It had evolved from random noise to a pattern. 3 short scratches, pause, 2 long scratches, pause. Morse code. I rushed to decode it on my phone's notepad. SOS. Over and over. 27 different rhythms of the same message filling the classroom with a symphony of desperation. During our 2:15 reading lesson, I discovered the children were using copies of the same outdated textbook. Pages fell out as students turned them. But rather than showing their age, these pages appeared to regenerate, replacing themselves with identical copies that smelled of fresh ink and cedar pencils. One page, torn by Benjamin Watkins, reformed itself while in my hand. As the paper knitted back together, I glimpsed text bleeding through from underneath. No substitute can leave until the substitute understands. I tried to maintain composure, reading aloud The Legend of Sleepy Hollow while monitoring the room. Halfway through Ichabod Crane's Midnight Ride, my voice caught. Every single child was mouthing the words along with me. Though they couldn't possibly be reading from their books, they were all looking directly at me, their eyes reflecting an inner glow that shouldn't exist under fluorescent lighting. When I stumbled over a word, every child corrected me in unison, their voices overlapping until they resembled one ancient, patient instructor. The final bell shriek at 3:15 sent waves of relief through my tense shoulders. Children packed their belongings with practiced efficiency, filing out in the precise order shown on the afternoon dismissal chart. I counted 26 students as they exited, the correct number according to my physical roster. But as the last student crossed the threshold, a 27th shadow detached from the corner of the room and followed. By 3:30, the building fell into its after-hours quiet. I gathered my materials, ready to report the irregularities to the principal and request reassignment. That's when I noticed the classroom door had no handle from the inside. The brass plate where it should be was smooth, polished to a mirror, finish that reflected not my face, but the face of a young woman in what appeared to be 1950s clothing, wearing the exact same expression of confused dread. Outside the door, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Small feet, many pairs, getting closer. I pressed my ear against the thick wood and heard children's voices singing, "Row, row, row your boat," in rounds that never quite resolved. Behind me, chalk scraped against the blackboard. When I turned, fresh words appeared one letter at a time. Class dismissed. Teacher must remain for detention. The footsteps stopped directly outside my door. In the silence that followed, I heard the distinct sound of brass nameplates being unscrewed. Then, the scratching of fresh engraving tools. The door's brass plate grew warm under my palm, then hot. When I jerked my hand away, I saw my name appearing in careful script, Elizabeth Thompson, 2024. I rushed to the windows, but they were painted shut from the outside. Fresh paint, applied recently enough that my fingers stuck when I pressed against the sills. The parking lot beyond remained empty except for my car, a bright blue Honda that suddenly seemed desperately far away. As I watched in horror, my car began rolling backward without anyone in the driver's seat, executing a perfect exit from the school grounds before disappearing down Pine Street. The lights in room 217 flickered once, twice, then stabilized in a softer glow that cast everything in sepia tones. My modern clothing began to feel uncomfortable, scratchy, wrong. When I looked down, my smart casual attire had been replaced by a high-necked blouse and long skirt that seemed to emerge from my own skin rather than replace my previous outfit. My phone, when I checked it frantically, displayed the date as October 17th, 1923, the day Elmwood Elementary first opened its doors. Behind me, desks creaked. I spun around to find the room slowly filling with translucent children, taking their assigned seats. Sarah, Tommy, Jessica, and others from the brass plates materialized first, their forms most solid. Other children followed, growing more transparent with each passing year. At the back of the room, in the empty space where Emma had insisted Tommy always sat, a boy my age materialized, wearing a modern t-shirt and jeans. He smiled sadly and gestured to a guest chair that I swear hadn't been there moments ago. "Miss Thompson," he said, and his voice carried the echoes of every substitute who had ever stood where I was standing. "The lesson begins now." Mrs. Kowalski was the previous instructor. Before her, Miss Peterson. Before her, Miss Clark. We've been waiting for someone who could finally figure out the equation. The blackboard numbers from that morning suddenly made horrifying sense. 3x9, sum of 27, 3 hours of instruction multiplied by 9 decades of trying equals 27 imprisoned substitutes. The math was perfectly, terribly simple. "You have until the next substitute arrives to solve our problem," he continued. "Some figure it out quickly and continue the cycle. Others," he gestured to the permanently fixed desks, "others decide to stay enrolled as students. The choice is yours, but you must choose." My mind raced through everything I'd observed. The seating charts spanning decades, the endless tutorials, the students who knew lessons before being taught them. These weren't supernatural hauntings. This was a teaching time loop, a classroom caught in an eternal educational cycle where someone had to maintain the continuum, either by escaping to bring the next substitute or by staying to be taught for eternity. The children waited patiently as understanding dawned. Each wore an expression I now recognized from the photo albums, that peculiar mix of resignation and hope. Some had been here for single years, others for multiple decades, but all waited to see if I would be the one to finally graduate, or if I would become another permanent student in Elmwood Elementary's endless syllabus. The wall clock ticked forward, but its hands moved counterclockwise. Outside, day faded not to night, but to a different quality of daylight. The thin, sepia-tinted illumination of a past forever cycling through its own timeline. I had approximately 3 hours before another unsuspecting substitute would arrive, drawn by whatever force kept this place in operation. 3 hours to either solve a nearly century-old educational puzzle or accept my enrollment in a school where no one ever truly graduates. As I sat in the guest chair, now solid beneath me, I noticed my lesson plans had changed. Instead of Mrs. Kowalski's careful instructions, I found a single question written in my own handwriting. If 27 substitutes fail to solve the same problem, what does the 28th need to do differently? Some problems, I realized, with growing dread, can only be solved by becoming part of the equation itself.